While we've all been focusing on the coronavirus and the concomitant stories, mandates good, mandates bad, figures up, figures down, deaths, comorbidities, etc., what stories haven't been told and what will be the consequences and what follows this pandemic? Let's dive into that now. Hello there, you 4.7 million shimmering miracles. I'm so glad we're here together. We get to have this conversation. We get to learn and change the world. Now, I know we use titles that are appealing and catchy, like, if you thought the pandemic was bad, wait till you see what's next. But the story behind that's a fascinating one, and one that I want you to understand. We've all been not necessarily distracted because the coronavirus is certainly an impactful phenomena, however you look at it. But what's happening now and what's also been happening during that 2 years is very interesting. New stories are emerging. Let's look at those now. In 2020, the number of miles Americans drove fell 30% because of the pandemic, but the number of traffic deaths rose by 7%. Why would Americans be driving so much more recklessly during the pandemic? But then in the first half of 2021, according to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, motor vehicle deaths were up 18.4% even over 2020. Contributing factors, according to the agency, included driving under the influence, speeding, and failure to wear a seatbelt. I guess where this article is going is when there is something like a pandemic that dominates a national and indeed global narrative, it perhaps masks secondary narratives that are impactful and affecting in their own way. Stories like these and statistics like these indicate a general malaise. Is a culture in decline? Are we entering a particular form of civilization's endgame? It seems pretty clear to me that we are. This is an epochal moment. Something we need to be aware of is transition. Transition doesn't necessarily mean deterioration. It means be aware, because we're about to enter a liminal space that could go in either direction. I suppose the coronavirus narrative has been so tightly controlled and amplified so strongly that we've been distracted from and not invited to examine secondary narratives around mental health, addiction, other consequences of the kind of changes and measures that have been implemented. Now, as the figures are no longer reported on American news, now as the various regulations end in the UK, perhaps this is time to look seriously at what the consequences are and what other stories have been unfolding and what the impact of those stories might be. Not only is reckless driving on the rise, but the number of altercations on airplanes has exploded. But we know what that bloody is. People are punching each other in the face and gobbing at each other if they ain't got masks on. The murder rate is surging in cities, drug overdoses are increasing, Americans are drinking more, nurses say patients are getting more abusive, and so on and so on. It's interesting, isn't it? Because there are numerous vectors, factors, and pieces of information that you could be examining. We're so trained on deaths up, deaths down, or GDP up, GDP down, that we're forgetting all kinds of other markers. How are you? Are you all right in there? You're a person, you're experiencing life, you're in and out of cars or public transport, you're walking on pavements and sidewalks. How are you feeling? What is your reality like? The news and the government and big business aren't interested in that layer of reality. These symptoms are rising up, perhaps to connect us to the deeper realities that we all participate in and perhaps can't communicate about. Teachers are facing a rising tide of disruptive behaviour. That could be because my kids have started school. The Wall Street Journal reported in December, schools have seen an increase in both minor incidents and more serious issues such as fights and gun possession. In Dallas, disruptive classroom incidents have tripled this year compared to pre-pandemic levels, school officials said. Now, of course, that could be because the nature of reporting has changed, but it does seem to indicate an underlying phenomenon, which I bet you personally are aware of. Do you feel different? Do things seem different to you? When you live in a culture where the only things that matter are things that can be measured, then you start to omit your own actual experience as a human, what it's like to be you, what your emotions are, how your spirit is. It's interesting when you are moved and marginalised out of the territories that are actually the most important things in your life. When we do stories about the pandemic perhaps facilitating the biggest wealth transfer in history, which can be tracked and demonstrated and proven, or make cartoon villains out of billionaires like Bezos or Bill Gates, we have to consider that these things are real and have real human consequences. Stuff that doesn't perhaps get told or demonstrated or shown or lit by the lens of the mainstream media, but nonetheless is occurring. The quality of lives of ordinary Americans, of ordinary people all over the world, is being negatively affected by the actions, policies and ideals of the people that are orchestrating the direction, creating the agenda. This month, the Institute for Family Studies published an essay called "The Drug Epidemic Just Keeps Getting Worse." What's that about? The essay noted that drug deaths had risen almost continuously for more than 20 years, but overdoses shot up, especially during the pandemic. You remember at the beginning when people were saying, hey, won't these lockdowns maybe cause people to take more drugs, drink more, and even end their own lives? And it's like, hey, don't say that. That's unpatriotic. Shut up. Hey, don't you think there'll be an increase in like sort of cancer and operations being put off and unnecessary? Hey, shut up. Don't talk about that. It's unpatriotic. What is this country we're supposed to be being patriotic to? And who benefits to the allegiance to this particular flag? The number of gun purchases has soared. In January 2021, more than 2 million firearms were bought. That's a response to fear, lack of trust in powerful institutions, suspicion between each other. All physical actions have an emotional element, an emotional component. As Americans' hostility towards one another seems to be growing, their care for one another seems to be falling. When you look at the media, that's hardly surprising, is it? All of the generation of negative propaganda, of reasons to dislike one another, the amplification of ideas. Made a joke about their airline spats and fights and brawls, but there you can literally see it. People are so energized by their opinion around whether or not to wear a mask because of media information that is escalating already frightened, fearful, and tense emotion. A study from Indiana University's Lilly Family School of Philanthropy found that the share of Americans who give to charity is steadily declining. That's a kind of sad thing too. Obviously there's an economic component, but if compassion is decreasing because you're continually told, oh, there's these people and it's their fault that they're this or it's their fault that they're that. This isn't the first time we've seen that. That's what all prejudice and bigotry is based on. They're different, it's their fault. Don't think about them. They're homeless, it's their fault. Who cares? If you start to amplify those narratives, there will be a consequence. In the year 2000, 66.2% of households made a charitable donation. But by 2018, preceding the pandemic, of course, only 49.6% did. So we're creating a less compassionate society. The share who gave to religious causes dropped as worship service attendance did, but the share of households who gave to secular causes also hit a new low, 42% in 2018. We're experiencing the stripping away of meaning, of connection, of our values as human beings, as spiritual beings. These feelings of altruism, compassion and trust are being replaced by suspicion, doubt and fear. Who's creating that suspicion, doubt and fear, and why are they doing it? Let me just, to take the suspense out of this. Because if we all recognise that we're basically the same in spite of obvious differences, then we'd get along with one another. We all look different, we all sound different, but ultimately we have the same interests. And people that distract us from that are doing it for a reason. And when we see an increase in distrust, mistrust, violence, hatred, while there's a wealth transfer happening, it would be foolish not to consider that there might be a connection. This is not even to mention the rise in polarisation, hatred, anger and fear. When I went to college, I never worried that I might say something in class that would get me ostracised. But now college students I know fear that one errant sentence could lead to social death. That's a monumental sea change. Again, the culture is creating conditions that are not beneficial to you. Culture is not your friend. Culture is your jailer. But something darker and deeper seems to be happening as well. A long-term loss of solidarity, a long-term rise in estrangement and hostility. This is what it feels like to live in a society that is dissolving from the bottom up as much from the top down. And some of the poisons must be cultural. In 2018, the Washington Post had a story headlined, "America is a nation of narcissists," according to 2 new studies. Narcissism, like an individual condition, must have concomitant social causes. If you're continually staring at a screen, scrolling, worrying about your appearance, fearful that if you say one wrong thing, you'll be socially ostracized, it does create self-obsession. That's what narcissism means. You're so obsessed with yourself that your reflection is appealing enough to cause you to die, to spiritually die. And these conditions are indeed cultural. They are created by a culture that doesn't want solidarity and union, because through solidarity, which can only be achieved after awakening, and unity that can only be achieved if you are individually awake, if you're alert and present, you can create new worlds. That is the good news here. We started this by saying, what will follow the pandemic? Will it be something worse? Well, the answer is, it's up to you. You can individually awaken. You can treat people well. You can make a decision not to spit at someone because they don't agree with your perspective on a contemporary issue. We can start to focus on where power is concentrated. We can start to organise, like the Canadian truckers are or the Indian farmers do, to create conditions that are beneficial. And we have to look beyond polarisation. We have to get beyond these people disagree with me. That's what they want you to be doing. That should be reason enough for you to to stop it. When you find yourself thinking and saying things that the mainstream media wants you to think and say, stop and reflect immediately. But that's just what I think. What do you think? And more importantly, how do you feel? How have you found the time of this pandemic? Are you fearful about going forward? What things are you doing to keep yourself together? What communities are you participating in? How are you going to stop yourself sliding into the dystopia that is being created for you? Let me know in the comments below. Give the video a like, share it around. If you enjoyed this video, have a look at this one on my side channel. Sign up to my mailing list. I'll communicate with you about what I'm up to. Please come and see me live if you can. I'm performing in February, March, April, May, all over the UK. There's a link in the description if you want tickets. But please, if you can, and I know you can, stay free.